and welcome to Superman Homepage Live, brought to you by supermanhomepage.com, the number one Superman fan site in the world. In this, our May 8th, 2023 show, we're going to be covering a range of topics, but our main topic tonight is to be interviewing our friend and author Ed Gross, who has a new book out. We're going to be talking about that soon. But also tonight we're going to be asking questions and comments. We're going to ask you for your questions and comments towards Ed and discussing his new book, Voices from Krypton. And joining me tonight is our good friend Mark Lax, who is standing in for Michael Bailey, who is unavailable this week and next. So welcome, Mark. How you doing?
Hello, Steve. Am I looking
Other
the
way.
right way?
That's right. Other way. That's it.
Oh, this way. Okay.
No, other way.
This way.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Close
Yeah.
enough.
Oh,
Okay.
it's all good. How have you been, Mark?
Not too bad. How have you been doing?
Yeah, not too bad at all. As I said, we've got our doing an interview tonight with author Ed Gross to talk about Voices from Krypton. We'll introduce him in a second. But as always, we are on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter tonight doing our live broadcast for Superman Homepage Live. And if fans want to get on and talk to us tonight, all they have to do is press the head to supermanhomepage.com/live. Well, they will find a call now button, which they'll be able to press, and they can use their phone or computer to call in and have a chat with us tonight. Also, they can use their fancy phone and scan that QR code that's on the screen right now. Does the same thing, gets you into our green room where you'll be able to watch the show live. Now, if you are going to be on the show tonight, and we probably won't take callers, but we're happy to maybe take questions. But if we do get you on the show tonight, please either mute your external speaker because we are on a bit of a delay, and also maybe wear some headphones. That always helps. But thank you to our sponsors and patrons, Douglas Meacham, John Patrick Van Pelt, and Tina Murray. We appreciate your support. And if you want to join those fine folks and be a supporter of the Superman homepage, you can click the join button there on YouTube. There are different levels of perks for different levels of membership. Or you can head to patreon.com/Superman homepage. Well, as I said, tonight we have got our friend and author Ed Gross. I'm going to bring him into the show right now. Welcome, Ed.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
How you doing?
Hey, Ed.
I'm good. Hey. I'm good. I'm excited.
Excellent.
All things Superman. What can I tell you? I'm excited.
Yeah, very good. Now, you and I have known each other for a number of years. We've collaborated on some things, done some websites. We met in person in Metropolis, Illinois for a Superman celebration about 5 years ago now.
Yeah, 2018. I think, right?
Yeah. So, we've had a long and storied history together.
Absolutely.
Now, we are getting you on to the show tonight because you have a new book out, which there's the cover there on your screen, Voices from Krypton, the unofficial, unauthorized oral history of Superman. So, before we discuss the book, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a bit about your background, how long you've been a Superman fan, all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Well, Superman fans most of my life. I mean, really. I think, it started in the mid-'60s when I discovered reruns of Adventures of Superman. And then miraculously discovered that there was comic books based on this guy. I had no idea. So I started collecting like anything with the S on it. I had hundreds of it. Whether it was Lois Lane or Jimmy Olsen or Adventure or whatever. I mean, I want to go through the list that everybody knows anyway. And it just stayed with me, and it evolved, in terms of I went with every actor that played Superman. I still do to this day. I said goodbye to Henry Cavill. I'm ready for whoever it is in Superman Legacy, just keep it coming. And, as a journalist, I started being an entertainment journalist about 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. And almost from the beginning, I started doing Superman-related interviews. So, that has dovetailed beautifully. My passion for Superman has dovetailed with my career as an entertainment journalist. And getting the opportunity to write Voices from Krypton, of course, is the culmination of all of that. That's like bringing both of those things together. And it's great. Just I love this character, and I will always be there for the character in terms of whatever form he shows up in. So
very nice.
So how would you describe the book, such as it is?
Well, it's something it's a format I've sort of become obsessed with. I think Mark Altman and I had written, I don't know if anyone knows Mark Altman. I assume some people do. Mark and I had written 7 oral history books together, starting with 50-Year Mission on the history of Star Trek. This book is a solo by me, and it is being an oral history in the sense of, I interviewed about 200 people for it, and the idea is to put together a jigsaw puzzle telling the history of this character over its 85-year history through the voices of all the people that I've spoken to and who people have graciously given me access to interviews where people are gone and that sort of thing that I can't get them. And it just interweaves the different quotes from the different people through the years, begins before Superman was created and goes right up to discussions of James Gunn's Superman legacy. I can't get more complete than that and up to date than that, I think, as this one is. And yeah, so it's just, the oral history is beautiful because it really is, as we like to say, it's like gathering 200 of your closest friends and having a conversation about something. And in this case, it happens to be Superman. And that's really how it reads, I think. I hope. We'll find out.
So, altogether, how long did this take to put this book together?
Well, I mean, in terms of actual, like, doing new interviews and writing, it took about a year and a half or so to pull it all together, I'd say. But really, it's been in the making since 1982. Because it's like, when I started this, like I say, most of the interviews are new. But I went down to my basement, the archives as I call it, but it's really just a bunch of boxes with cassette tapes in them. And I pulled out this huge one with all my Superman related interviews from over the years. So, I'm going through, I've got Jeremy Lemkin talking about Superman Reborn from the 90s, and Deborah Joy Levine talking about Lois and Clark, and Lee Sholem talking about Superman and the Mole Men. I mean, it's an incredible archive that way in the sense of all the people I've spoken to. And then, like I say, you take all that with all the new interviews that were done, and it really does create this tapestry of the Man of Steel over 85 years.
That's
cool. Now, your website's also Voices from Krypton. Where'd you get the name?
Years ago, I mean, I still have it. It's very funny. I started when I was first trying to play with websites. I had voicesfromkrypton.com. I just figured it'd be mostly Superman related, but could also be sci-fi. That was the original idea. Since then, I just went crazy, just for some reason, just grabbing voicesfromkrypton.net. On Facebook, there's a group page for Voices from Krypton, even though it's just now starting to get updated again regularly. I've got Instagram, Twitter. I've got everything with Voices from Krypton. So when the opportunity came to do an oral history of Superman, Voices from Krypton, perfect, right? I mean, I think it's just a perfect name for an oral history of Superman. So there you go. I just always like the sound of it. So VFK as the initials, So.
Yeah. Yes. No, it's great. Now, creating an oral history book, the concept, the format, it's quite unique. Where did the idea come from for creating a book in this format?
Initially, it came from Mark Altman, who as I mentioned, I wrote these other books with. He introduced me to the concept of a oral history. I had no idea. I'd never heard of it before, believe it or not. This was in 2015 or so. And there were 2 that he pointed me to, Live from New York, the Saturday Night Live oral history, and I Want My MTV, the MTV oral history. I read those things, fell in love with the format, and now it's like, this is it. As far as I'm concerned, if people will let me, I will do this for the rest of my life, writing oral histories. And I mean that. I really would. I'm very disorganized person in a lot of ways, yet somehow my brain clicks with oral histories. I'm like an idiot savant with oral histories, that I can see the different interviews spread around me and somehow interweave them into telling a story.
That's impressive.
Well,
so how much did you actually...
Good.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to ask, how much of the book did you actually write, as opposed to all your interviews and collating all your information?
Well, the writing honestly speaking, the writing of like my voice in the book, besides the introduction, is really bridging the different sections. Like, in other words, if somebody finishes talking about the adventures of Superman, for instance, and then I have to get into the Jerry Siegel situation or something. What that's not a right example because it doesn't flow one to the other. But my point is, every time you finish a section, you have to have a little bridging, like a
Hmm.
paragraph or two, sort of describing and leading into the next thing. So I'm really more of the guide than I am the author of that material. You know what I
Sure.
mean? It's really just keeping everything on track, telling this story in a linear fashion, uh, and again chronicling over 85 years worth of the history.
So you obviously you said you've delved into your archives and you've found all these interviews that you've done over the years. So how much of the content in the book is your personally conducted interviews versus interviews that you've had to quote from? I mean, there are people who are deceased who are not around anymore that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to interview. I don't know if you ever got to interview Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster themselves, but even going back
No,
to the Fleischer days and things like that, how much is it was interviews that you conducted versus interviews that you've pulled from?
when you're talking about things like that, the Fleischer era, the creation of Superman with Siegel and Schuster, and that sort of thing, you turn to people like Tom Andre is a journalist who and a comic historian who did a really extensive interview with Jerry and Joe and gave me permission to use whatever I wanted from that interview. So this way I could interview Jerry, interweave rather Jerry and Joe in the text. So when you talk about those early days, that's where you really have to depend on the kindness of strangers, as they say.
Yeah.
Um, and the other part of this, and this is a very important part as far as I'm concerned of the oral history, is turning to people like you, Steve, that I interviewed you about different things, to talk about different historians, film experts, comic book historians, authors of different books, and letting them comment on if it's the serials. You get people coming in and commenting on the serials. Now I got permission from a gentleman named Andy Mangels to run his Kirk Allen interview, so his Kirk Allen interviews in the book interwoven with other quotes.
Hmm.
But then that cuts with Ed Hulse, who is an expert on serials and pulp fiction and that sort of thing. So you get to take the people who were there and then take the people commenting on it, interweave both, and I think creates a richer story because you're not just getting the perspective of the guy who was there, especially at the time,
Hmm.
but you're able to interweave these different quotes and different perspectives that enlarge the story you're telling, I think.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. I mean, we sat down for a number of chats to talk about various areas and
Absolutely.
eras of Superman, and reading through the book, it's a little bit jarring to see my name and something that I said. It's just like, oh, that's me. But yeah, it is really cool the amount of people and some of the names that I've come across, the people that I know personally. Michael Bailey's even quoted in there, and some of the other Superman fans that run websites are in there, and it's really cool to see just the broad and depth of people that you've been able to get quotes from and get their views on things. I mean, obviously I wasn't around during the Fleischer era or the 1940s show or anything like that. I might look like that old, but I'm not. But but we all have an opinion on those
Right.
versions of Superman. So it's really cool that you, as you say, interweave the personal perspectives and opinions of well-known fans and well-known people amongst the Superman fandom that have a perspective and a view on these different versions of the character. It's really well written, or really well
Thank you.
collected, I should
I,
say.
I really do appreciate it. What was the last thing you said?
I sort of really well collected, like the way that you've. I don't know how you said you're a disorganized person, but the way that you're able to, I couldn't imagine, being able to know when, who to put next. You grab a paragraph from this person, then you put another paragraph, and if different person, it's like you've got so many things to go to grab from, to be able to put them in an order that actually makes, linear sense.
And it takes the thing is you play with that right to the very end
yeah, I'm sure.
because I have to keep rereading, and if I step away from it for too long, I
Yeah.
have to start from the beginning reading it again because otherwise my brain is just not focused enough to be able to know where things go.
Hmm.
And that's frustrating. You have to read like, oh, I'm up to 30,000 words, I'm up to 50,000 words. I mean, this thing's 330,000 words. I mean,
Wow.
that's how big this thing is. But it is a jigsaw puzzle, like I said,
Hmm.
and it is putting the puzzle together, and you're constantly trying the puzzle pieces in different ways to get it. It's like, and I think I mentioned this to you in one of our chats. The thing that drives me the most mental, and anyone watching any of these interviews I'm doing will hear me bitch about, complain about this. Sorry, was the criticism you get where somebody inevitably says, "This is just a bunch of random quotes thrown together." And it infuriates me because I know the blood, sweat, and tears that I've put into trying any of these books, whether it's Mark and I doing it or myself doing it. You know, the time that is spent trying to they had to pry this book out of my hands
Hmm.
because I could still be writing it right now, in fact, and this is months later, if they would have let me. But it is I love it, so I'm not complaining at all. But it is a time
Oh
consuming,
yeah.
intricate process I found. And again, for a guy who doesn't have the patience to do anything, this is uh, this is my one thing. So
I imagine it to me, it's almost like, when they're trying to solve a murder or a crime and they've got one of those big boards with the red string, everywhere, trying to connecting this one to this one. And it's just like that. To me, that would be how your brain is.
I don't know because I don't do it. I don't plot it out that much. I
Yeah.
just start plopping quotes in,
Yeah.
and as I start
Rearranging.
plopping the quotes in, it starts to build. Oh, this needs to go in the serials. This needs to go in the Silver Age of the comics. This needs to go to Christopher Reeve, whatever it may be. But you start off just throwing quotes on the page and then playing with them, and then you start adding quotes to it and build. It's like I don't know if you want to call it. I hate to come across the wrong way, like, oh, I'm creating art here. I'm not trying to say that at all, but it's like it's sculpting. I mean,
Yeah,
it really is.
it
It's
is.
it's it's sculpting this thing into some sort of form. I'm always nervous of coming across the wrong way because I'm not trying to sound egotistical about it.
No.
It's just passion more than anything. It's my
Yeah, for
passion.
sure.
So, is there anyone that you really wanted to interview that you didn't get a chance to, and more importantly, anyone you wanted to that didn't want to be interviewed?
Anyone that I wanted that didn't want to be interviewed, is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Yes.
The one only turn down I got that I can think of really, I may have gotten a few more actor interviews and stuff that got turned down. John Byrne was the only one that turned me down. I mean, Mark Wade's in this, Alex Ross is in this, Dan Jurgens is in this. So I got a lot of the big guys, the comic guys. Now, here's an instance where okay, I couldn't get John Byrne. Boy, that was a brain fart. Just said the guy's name. But I turned to somebody who did do an extensive interview with him and got permission to get his quotes, and it's attributed in the book that we have the at the start of the book of all these books. It's the dramatis persona, and it's basically a list of every interview in the book, basically.
Mm.
And if it's my interview, then it just says the name and who the person is, and if it's somebody else's, it'll say the name, who the person is, and then parentheses, courtesy of, and that's how
Right.
Mhm.
Steve gave me a few interviews to use in the book. And that works out really well because you don't want to have the blank spaces, and if you have somebody who can give that to you,
Mm.
it's worth to me. I'm not going to have my ego to the point where it's like, well, if I didn't write it or do the interview, I'm not going to have it in the book. I'd rather have all the voices in the book and go from there. So that was the only one. I mean, really, I could think of that turned me down
Mm.
that I went after. I was very lucky. I mean, I got Brandon Routh to write the forward and Mark Wade to write the afterword. I'm just, I'm just thrilled. I mean, I really am.
We'll get to those ones in a second, but so
Yeah.
was there any materials, when you weren't able to conduct an interview and you had to source material from somewhere else, was there anybody who knocked you back and didn't give you permission, to include something that you really wanted?
I don't think so. I mean, if let's put it this way, if there were people who did, I'm blocking it out of my head. No, it was minor. The interviews were minor. Like it would have been great to have that voice in it, whatever that voice is. But pretty much all the big voices that I needed, I was able to get. I mean, the only thing I have to totally depend on other sources for is like Christopher Reeve, for instance. And in every quote that Christopher Reeve is there, at the end of that quote, it does say whether it's from what newspaper it's from or
Mm.
whatever it may be, because I obviously couldn't get Christopher Reeve, but I got everybody around him. I got Richard
Mhm.
Donner, Richard Lester, the Newmans. I mean, I had tons of Tom Mankiewicz. So, yeah.
Cool.
Now, we mentioned Brandon Routh. How did that come about?
Well, I've interviewed Brandon over the years a number of times. I mean, starting with Superman Returns, and then I would try to interview him. Like Dylan Dog was coming out, I did an interview with him. Legends of Tomorrow came out, I did an interview with him. For the 10th anniversary of Superman Returns, I was able to get separately both him and Bryan Singer to look back at it, which was great because so often it's like you get at the time of the movie, and it doesn't have that perspective looking back. So I was able to get that. And then when it came to this book, when I wrote to his people, I basically said, would it be possible to either speak to Brandon for the book or get him to write the forward? And they came back and said he'd rather write the forward. I mean, he'd rather do the interview. I'm sorry. So we did, and I had sent them all the interviews I've done with him over the years, and I guess they forwarded them. And we met at Superman Celebration, the same one I saw you at, Steve. I think
Mhm.
you interviewed Brandon there as well.
Yes.
And so I interviewed Brandon there, and he remembered it. And we did the interview, and then after the interview, as the interview was winding down, I just asked him, by any chance, would you be interested in writing the forward? Because I love your perspective of Superman and would love to have some reference of that beyond our conversation. So he said, let me think about it. And he came back a few days later and said, yes, that he would.
Nice.
So, and he was the funny thing is, he was the last interview I did for the book. So it's kind of cool that I got a Superman for the last interview, and he agreed to write the forward, which I'm just so grateful for.
Mm.
He
Brilliant.
seems like a really great guy.
He
He
is.
really
He is.
does.
I mean, he's a really great guy, and I'm not just saying that because he wrote the forward, so I better say something
He's in the
nice
book.
about him. Uh, he's a nice guy, and I think if you read his forward, you understand who he is and
Mm.
where he's coming from, especially how the impact that this character, playing this character and living with it for so long, even though he only had the opportunity to play it twice, uh, the impact it had on him and how it changed his life. And he's using that to try to not influence other people, but to spread the good word kind of thing
Yeah.
of what the message of Superman is.
Hmm.
It's just wonderful. So yeah, I was really, forward or not, I was so grateful to get to speak to him and again, and have him so well represented in the book. So
Yeah, he's really down to earth, genuine guy. We
yeah,
had the opportunity to chat with him extensively on video for an interview that we did at the Superman Celebration 5 years ago, back in 2018, and he took the time out during his lunch break. Like, he'd just done all this autograph signing for hours on end,
right.
and him and his mum and dad were in the back room, and he was happy to talk to us during the lunch break for as long as we wanted, and
That's
was
good.
just so giving of his time. And he can, having met his parents, you can see that he is the product of just great parenting and genuine people
Yeah,
and just salt of the earth people.
it's like Jonathan and Martha Kent
Yeah.
raising Kal-El.
Exactly. Exactly. Now,
Yeah.
similarly, Mark Wade also wrote the afterward piece for the book. Did he take much convincing, or how did that come about?
Mark and I have known each other for a long time, and I've dragged Mark through, like he and I did a conversation about Superman Birthright over a number of sessions. It's like a 20,000 word piece or something, looking issue by issue at Superman Birthright. So Mark is somebody I turn to periodically and just chat with or try to interview and that sort of thing. And when it came to the book, I mean, he had given me so much time interviews. You'll see his name throughout the book, basically. And then again, it was one of those situations where, would you be willing to write the afterward? I've got Brandon Routh writing the forward. Would you be willing to write the afterward? He didn't hesitate. He just said yes, and I think he did a great job on that. And he was very complimentary about the book and about our conversations and that sort of thing. So it worked out well. These are the cherries on the cake, getting Brandon and Mark to take the time to write something special for the book beyond just giving their time to be interviewed was really wonderful. And no, so it wasn't the beauty of this whole process for me and the experience of writing this book was that nobody was hesitant.
Mm.
Anyone who was willing to talk to me, their love for Superman or their perspective they were willing to share of Superman. Not everything was positive, they said, so it wasn't some sort of whitewash. But these people were genuinely interested in talking about this character. And with the exception of one person, and I don't want to say the name, I did not feel rushed during any of these interviews. They just took the time, and if I needed to do a follow up session, they did.
Cool.
No matter how busy they
Great.
were. And again, I keep saying how appreciative I am. I am, but it also shows their love for this character and what the character has meant to them in their lives, and what the character means to the world as a whole.
Brilliant.
And supporting that and what they're talking about. So, yeah.
Now, do you need any special permission from DC or Warner's for what you had to do, or
Nope.
did they do?
Uh, that's why it's unofficial and unauthorized. Look, the problem with doing authorized books for any subject is that the owner of this copyright is going to want a licensing fee to begin with. And those licensing fees are exorbitant. They just are, for no matter what it is. I'm not talking about Warner Brothers or DC. I'm talking about across the board. The price is so high, and they get approval of the text. So if you think that a lot of the stuff that made it into this book would have made it into an official book, no way.
It wouldn't. No.
No way would have. And nobody's being tarnished. I mean, the whole Siegel Schuster DC thing, both sides, I went down that rabbit hole and spent a long time in there. It was like very frustrating in a way to make sure that both sides were presented, because neither one is the hero, neither one is the villain. And that was a really important focus of mine, to present in this. But no, so no, I didn't even bother. I mean, anyone who is currently working with DC and Warner Brothers, I wouldn't even approach, because there's no point to it, because they're just going to go to the heads of whoever and say, "Hey, can I talk to this guy?" And then they're going to say, "Well, what are you doing?" In fact, that happened. I went after one person, and I did get it contacted, and they were like, "So, hey, Ed, how are you? Hope you had a good weekend." I don't even know this person from Adam. And it was just kind of like, "So, you're writing a Superman book. What's it about? When's it coming out? Who's publishing it? Who have you spoken to? Who are you planning on speaking to?" I didn't answer the letter. I mean, I'm not stupid. you know, so there you go. So,
Yeah.
because there's nothing illegal about this book.
No,
It's
exactly.
people talking about the history of a character, and even the image on the cover, right? The emblem has the initials of the actors in them, and they're caricatures of the actors, as you can see. It's and that's it. And then we were very careful not to violate any copyright problems, or violate any copyright issues rather, and stayed very legal with this thing. And I think the book is better for being unofficial than if it was official.
For sure. Now, speaking of the cover, obviously the caricatures and you haven't used the symbol of the S, but so who is the artist, and can you talk about the design of the cover and how that all came about?
Sure. The artist is DC Stoltner, I think it's pronounced, and I apologize to him if I've gotten that wrong. Um, what happened was I came across his art online, and I said, and this was before I had a deal for the book. I just knew that if I was my agent had a hard time selling this book, and I knew that one way or the other this book was going to be written and published. Even if I did it myself, I didn't care. So I hired the artist to start doing it. And the original concept was based on the 80-page Giants.
Hmm.
I mean, it had Voices from Krypton and the Superman logo. It said 80 plus years. They even had the comics code thing in the corner.
Right.
It was a fun thing, but legally they said, nah. NASO was like, we don't think so. That's taking it too far. Is that doing the Superman style logo for Voices from Krypton was perceived as treading too much on DC's toes.
Yeah.
So we pulled back from that, and I get it, and no problem. And yeah, so that was the original concept. The whole idea was to make sure that it was caricature, and it went over so well in house that I then did a Stargate book, and we did the same thing. And I just finished an Indiana Jones book, and that's going to have a caricature like cover as well. And that we've decided that's going to be sort of the calling card of these books. They will
Yeah.
all have this caricature like cover. So yeah, that's how the cover came about.
So are the caricatures individual graphics? Like, did he do them individually and then you Photoshop them into one thing, or How did
Well,
that?
he did. I don't know how he put the cover together. I have no idea. I can write 330,000 words in a book, but don't ask me to use Photoshop because it's like, oh, you know.
Nice.
uh, but he put them together. But then for the interior of the book in black and white,
You've got
each
the
one of those
individuals.
caricatures are presented
Yep.
in the book.
Yep.
So we
I
get
saw
to
that.
double exposure or whatever of each of those things. And then we even have an illustration, additional illustrations like Jor-El is a bagel because that's how Marlon Brando wanted to play it. So we got Jor-El. Marlon Brando is a
uh,
bagel. Great. It's really
Awesome.
so yeah.
was it difficult to decide how to organize the book? I mean, it's in 13 chapters. Was it?
Not really. The trick was because you're dealing with. I wanted to make sure the comic book history was given. I'm a much more of a production guy. Like I'm much more into the various media versions of Superman. But I wanted to make sure the comics were given their due, an equal amount of weight. So it really wasn't. The challenge was figuring out. Okay, here's pre DC and how Major Wilson Nicholson came up with the idea of DC, then teamed up with the other guys and Abe Leibowitz and brain fart. Sorry, uh, but he teamed up with them, and so we started with that, and then the idea was here's how Superman was created. Then you have to get into the introduction of Superman, which is pretty basic territory. But then you have to start worrying about dividing things up because in 1940 you get the radio show.
Hmm.
So suddenly you're going from the introduction of Superman and the impact he has to a chapter on the radio show, the Filmation cartoons. Then you have to go back into Superman becoming a patriot in the comic books for World War II, and then come out of that and go into the movie serials and then go back into the Silver Age, once you get past the adventures of Superman,
Hmm.
and you get into the Silver Age of Superman. And it's this constant, and in that chapter though you deal with the comics in the Super Age with Mort Weisenberg and what he brought to it, Weisinger, I'm sorry, what he brought to it, and the animated show The New Adventures of Superman, and the Broadway musical It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, the Jerry Siegel suing again, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster suing again, and the results of that. And then you go into the 70s, so it's the Bronze Age comics, then Christopher Reeve, and etc. It's like, so every chapter is like, you know, we have a chapter called Burn to Death, which is, who's this we? I have a chapter called Burn to Death, which is basically going from John Byrne's part of Superman to
Hmm.
the death of Superman and the impact of that. And then from there, we go into the further TV adventures of Superman, which, and to me, this is like the most important chapter in the book in some ways. It's chronicling the making of 6 TV shows, starting with the Ruby Spears cartoon in 88, 87, 88,
88. Yep.
going to
Yeah.
Superboy, going to Lois and Clark, to Superman the Animated Series, to Smallville. I mean, it's just that right there is a microcosm of the history of Superman in that
Hmm.
section. It's just to show how he goes on and changes, and the actors change, and yet Superman lives on. So that's a long answer, and I'm hoping it's not too tangential, but
No, that's
No.
great.
it, the whole book is that way, though. It's just bouncing back and forth between comics and production.
So, for you, on your personal perspective, what was the most challenging thing about putting this book together? Was it time? Was it constraints? Was it cost? Well, what was the most difficult thing?
I think time. I mean, like I said, the Siegel Schuster thing really sucked a lot of time out of this
Hmm.
because every time I turned around, there was more to explore in that. And I'm not talking about a biography of Siegel and Schuster. I'm talking about the whole battle,
Hmm.
that legal battle that went on, would sort of leave the book and come back in the book and leave the book and come back in the book as things would go on in the years. But I think time is the biggest issue because, like I was jokingly saying before, but it's really true, I had to stop writing the book. I had no
Hmm.
choice, you know. And there's new stuff happening. I want to include that, and I can't. I have to stop. I mean, and length was the problem too. It was. I knew I was going to be in trouble once I passed 300,000 words. I knew that it's like this is going to be an issue because I have to wrap this up because they're not going to print a 500,000 word book. They're just not going to. So I guess time and space, believe it or not, is despite how
Yeah.
big the book is. You know.
No, I can understand that.
And all your research, anything that came across you that surprised you? I mean, I know you know a lot about Superman, but anything, any little
I don't
nugget that.
know. It's hard to say. I've been asked that before, and I never have a good answer for it, unfortunately, because it's like, yeah, I knew a lot of the history, but to me, it just all blends together. You know what I mean? In telling the story, it's just all part of the whole, and it's very hard for me to take a step back and say, well, this was amazing, because everything was amazing in some way or another. You find out certain things, and I wish I could tell you some great revelation that came out of this, but it's hard to, because like I say, it all blends together when you're
Mm.
interweaving hundreds of people's worth of comments and try to remember which one was like, oh, that was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, the fun thing for me was discovering, I said the thing about my basement before. I found an interview with Scott Wells, the first actor to play Lex Luthor on Superboy. I don't think too many people have interviewed Scott Wells.
Mm.
And I came across this tape. And it's interesting. It's sad in a way because he kind of predicts his own future in the interview.
Mm.
But to have that, to be able to come across that, it was like I just finished, as I mentioned, the Indiana Jones book, right? I remembered I had two cassettes in my basement labeled Young Indy. So I knew there were interviews with people involved with Young Indy. And there were, and I got them, and that's great. But on those tapes, for some reason, unlabeled, was an hour interview with Jeffrey Boehm, who's no longer with us, who was the writer of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Suddenly, I had an hour conversation with Jeffrey Boehm for the book. That's the kind of discovery that I would make. Jonathan Lumpkin for Superman Reborn. I had two cassettes of him back in my Cinescape days talking about that. Those were the amazing discoveries for me, is finding those old things that, like, again, nobody else would have,
Mm.
unless you sat down and interviewed these people at the time and the ones who weren't with us anymore. So those are the great things for me.
Mm, for
That's,
sure. So,
yeah.
who was the most fun to interview? I mean, whether it's a recent one just for the book or back in the day when you were doing it, who's been the most fun interview that you've had the pleasure of talking to?
Boy, I have to say, I mean, for all the new ones I did, I'm this guy who, as always, as a journalist, have believed in having conversations with people and
Mm.
then carving the interview out of the conversation. That's sort of always been my approach, whether I meant it or not, just the way it came across. That's what happened with this. Every conversation was so much fun because everybody's just going back and forth about it and stuff, and it was just a great joy. I mean, one of my nicest memories, it was many years ago. I was supposed to interview Richard Donner when Lethal Weapon was coming out in '87, and I was living in an apartment on Long Island at the time. I'm still on Long Island, but not in the apartment. Uh, and I was supposed to go into New York to interview him, and I got sick as a dog. I mean, I had like 102 fever. I could not get in there, so I called the publicist and said, "I'm so sorry. I have to cancel this interview." Well, I got a phone call that next morning, and I heard the very distinctive voice of Richard Donner saying, "Hello, Ed Gross. Yes, this is Dr. Donner. I figured, why don't we talk on the phone instead of in person?" And we had a lovely conversation, I mean, for like 40 minutes or 45 minutes about Lethal Weapon and Superman and all this. But that opened, like, I could keep going back to him, and I did. I would have further conversations with him about Superman. He would put me in touch with people. He sent me scripts and storyboards and all kinds of stuff. It was just, to me, that was one of the most delightful interviews just because it was unexpected. And he was so impressive because he was just excited about talking about Gilligan's Island as he was talking about Superman the movie. He just loved what he did so much.
That's
It
awesome.
was great. To me, that was wonderful. So I think that's a real highlight for me, just from the memory of it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
As a person thing.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Of the few people out there who might not want to read this book, what would be your push to get them to crack it open?
First, it would be, "What's the matter with you? Read the
Yeah,
book." I mean,
that's what
look,
I'd say. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, look, the only thing I can really say is, that Superman has been out there around you, even if you're not a huge fan, for all these years, decades and decades, and versions. Here's an opportunity, if you have even the vaguest interest in this character, of just diving in and getting all those different perspectives of why he matters,
Mm.
why he has mattered, why he continues to matter, despite all the people that say, "Oh, he's boring, he's a Boy Scout," and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that's the thing. And in oral history, You don't feel like you're slogging through a book of a history of something. It is so, I believe, conversational because of the format. We can almost pick up anywhere, just start reading a section and hopefully get sucked into it.
Mm.
So that's what I would say. It's like if you want to know anything about this, well, not anything about the character per se, but this character's history, again, why he matters, this is the book. I hope that was the intent. Whether I achieved it or not will be for others to decide. But that is the intent, and I hope that people will give it a shot for that reason.
I totally agree. And fans are sending us some questions that are watching live with us tonight.
Uh-oh.
We'll get to those in a second. But you've mentioned a couple of times that you had to stop. You had to finish it somewhere, and you could continue writing it if you wanted to. Do you think you'll ever go down that road of revisiting, maybe doing a version 2 or an updated version because there are new material like Superman Legacy and My Adventures with Superman, the animated series coming up, and hopefully more seasons of Superman and Lois on TV? Do you think anywhere down the track you might have to do an updated version?
I hope so, because I would love to. I've even said to them, but it's going to all depend on the sales of this book.
Yeah.
But I've even said for 2025, when Superman Legacy comes out, maybe it would make sense to do a second volume that would dig deeper into things like the real history of the full history of Superboy or Supergirl, the new movie, you know what I mean, and take the things that are there. Really get into Lois Lane, how she's evolved over the years. Lex Luthor, how he's evolved over the years. There's so many more areas to be discussed, and I hope that I would love to do a volume 2 more than anything of this, because there's no way they're going back to press on a 723-page book to add more to it. I don't think so. Now maybe for the ebook, possibly, but my preference really would be to be Voices from Krypton Volume 2, and really dig into some of these other areas that I could only sort of touch on. As much as Lois Lane is in this book, there's a lot to be said about Lois Lane and
Oh,
her evolution over the years,
for
right?
sure.
And the same thing with everybody else. So that would be my hope, is that I get the chance to. It sells well enough that I can do a follow-up volume.
Yeah, awesome.
That's
We
the
hope
dream.
that it does. We're hoping to push it as much as we can that
I shall
happens.
accept it. Thank you.
Now we're going to the fan questions. John Patrick Van Pelt says, and this one probably isn't doable, but have you ever thought of doing a audiobook version of Voices from Krypton?
It would really be. I mean, I don't know if they're planning on it. If Nacelle Books is planning on doing anything, I haven't heard one of it. Uh, to try to interweave like the actual interviews I've done, that's really hard to do because it's, nobody's doing these interviews thinking, well, they're going to put my voice out there and, in a book. Most of these audio books, and I find them a little difficult with audio or oral histories, is you've got one or two people basically reading all these different voices, hundreds of voices. That's a challenge, and
Yeah.
and to make it interesting and all. So I'm not sure if it could be done or not. I mean, I'd certainly be interested in it, and I'd love to see a documentary made out of this book someday. If you're listening, Nacelle, they do documentaries. Um, but yeah, so I don't know, and I do think for an oral history, an audiobook is tough.
Now, Ed, do you have any suggestions on what actor should play Superman next? You've mentioned that you've said goodbye to Henry Cavill. Do you have a preference? And who has been your favorite on screen so far?
Well, Christopher Reeves is my favorite. There's no question. But there's I liked Henry. I mean, I may not be happy with all the material he was given, but I thought he was a very good Superman, and the potential was there to be a great Superman. And even in that little moment in Black Adam, that you saw the promise there of the uplifting Superman with the John Williams theme playing, and Giant James Gunn, please use the John Williams theme in the Superman Legacy. But I mean, I love Tyler as Superman and Superman and Lois. I think he's doing a great job. But I can go through most of the actors who have played him. There is something to be said for most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not every one of them, but for most of them. Uh, that you can go to and say it's just a different interpretation. To me, it's like James Bond. Sean Connery's my man, right? He's James Bond. It's the one I grew up with. But I went with 7 movies of Roger Moore, and I was right there when it shifted over to Timothy Dalton, and etc. So that's how I feel about Superman. If it has the S, I'm there, and I'm excited to see what they're doing. So Christopher Reeve's absolutely the favorite. But I can't help but smile when I see Superman in action, in a film or a TV show, I just get sucked in. It's like I'm a really easy mark.
Very cool. Now, Justin Suarez says, do you like the trunks or no trunks? S on the cape or no S on the cape? And which symbol is your favorite? So let's start with the trunks. Yes or no?
Wow, that's tough. This sounds like such a cop out, though. But if you have the trunks, okay, cool. If you don't have the trunks, okay, cool. I mean, Henry Cavill looked great in his costume without the trunks. Tyler doesn't have the trunks. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think.
No, you're right. He only wore it when they did the Fleischer version of the costume.
Yeah.
Right. That was different, right? But that was a great moment, by the way. My mom made it for me. So good.
I love that.
But so as far as the trunks are concerned, I will go either way. Whatever. I'm fine either way. And when I first saw it without the trunks, I was, well, this is stupid. But then I got used to it, and now it doesn't really bother me. It's really, I'm all open to evolution if it works.
Yeah.
And that works to me. S on the cape. If it wasn't so difficult for the guys making the movie to have the S all crumpled up as the cape moves and that sort of thing, or in CG you have to keep making it, I like the S on the cape. But if you don't have it, it's okay. I mean, I prefer the S on the cape.
Okay.
Right.
Now,
I prefer the S, but you can't do it.
Which version of the symbol is your favorite?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, boy, they're going to say, does he know anything about Superman? I got to tell you the truth. A real soft spot for me is the Golden Age Superman logo. You mentioned the suit that Tyler was wearing. Mm-hmm. I, for some reason, love that logo. I don't know why. But that look, I have a few T-shirts that have Superman, the Golden Age Superman with that logo on it. And I love it. I mean, I really do. I mean, but I see the S, right? I said before, it's like I go with the S. I like the S. I get excited every time I see it. I mean, Super Pets had the commercial, right? With the trailer with the John Williams playing. I was immediately like, what? And was there and smiled through the whole stupid thing. So symbol wise, I do like the Christopher Reeve style, that big S, where they say, oh, it looks like a Halloween costume. I don't think so. I think it looks great. So that would probably be my favorite is that era.
Now, you've obviously got some material behind you. You've got a spinner rack with some comic books. You've got a massive statue. Do you have a big collection of Superman merchandise and memorabilia?
I have. You know what it is? Everybody like my wife especially, everybody gives me Superman gifts. I'm the easiest guy in the world, right, to buy gifts. So my son, my middle son, who's like 29, loves Sonic the Hedgehog, so he's easy that way too. It's like everyone buys him Sonic stuff. For me, I've been sitting in a room. We redid our house a few years back, and my wife, who's not into this stuff at all, but said to me, "Why don't we turn one room into a Superman room for you?"
Wow, she's a keeper.
Which was wonderful. She was she's a keeper. And like the statue, and Aunt gave us crazy money when we were going through the whole rebuilding the house thing. She said, "Just do something crazy with it. Don't pay bills." So she surprised me and got me the statue, which I don't know how to make this work. But there you go.
I gave you a screen.
It's great. It's great. And then her and my sons chipped in for the comic rack. So I have that. Immediately went down to the basement and pulled up a box of comics. And I've told this story already too. But there's the truth of the matter is, my father. Oh shit! Something dripping. Sugar. Sorry. Sounds like dripping. My father had this comic. The History of Dogs, right?
Okay.
The Illustrated History of Dogs. There it is. The first time I ever read a comic book. As soon as I read that, and then I realized Superman was in comics, I had fallen in love with the medium. And then I got Superman. It was again, another perfect dovetailing for me of
wonderful
of these two things. So
very cool.
So yes, it's a decent collection, but it's all gifts that people have given me. I don't go out and buy anything.
Nice.
So
that's the best.
I'm a writer. I can't afford to buy anything.
Exactly. Before we move away about talking about your book, is there anything you wanted to leave us with about the book? We're going to continue on for the next 10 minutes talking about other Superman stuff, but anything about the book that you want to touch on?
Well, it's being released on June 6th from Nacelle Books. It's available now for pre-order at a good discount. I think it's for the hardcover, it's $10 less than the cover price of the book. No, just that know that I'm sure there are going to be people who are going to read this book or look at this book and say, well, he didn't cover this and he didn't cover that. But obviously, oh, I guarantee you there will be people saying I didn't cover certain things. But my feeling is you can only cover so much. I mean, even at 720 something pages, you can only cover so much. And so I would say to people, my hope is that this will be the book you've always wanted on Superman.
Cool.
Certainly the book I've always wanted, which made me want to write it.
Hmm.
And there have been some great books about the history of Superman, but the oral history just gives it a whole new slant, I think, to what's come before. So that's my feeling
Awesome.
about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's get into some other topics that we normally get into. And I wanted to touch on this, and being a writer yourself, Ed, the writer strike at the moment, fans just want to know how does it affect certain things that they love. And Superman Legacy won't be affected because the script has been written by James Gunn. It's done and dusted, and the first draft is in, and they're now looking at casting and doing all the pre-production stuff. But your thought on the writer's strike and all that kind of stuff?
I really remember the 1988 writer's strike, and that one was tough. I mean, that I forget how many days that lasted, but television really got a shakedown with that. Basically, that's when
Big
you
time.
got things like, oh, let's take old scripts from old TV shows and remake them. Like here's Mission Impossible '88, uh, using scripts from the original series, and that sort of thing could happen again. That's how we got reality TV. Curse you, writer's strike. But we ended up getting reality TV in the last writer's strike. I think it was the last one, or maybe two ago. With it, as far as Superman Legacy is concerned, yes, he handed in a fresh draft. Unfortunately, there have to be many more drafts, I'm sure. I remember the story that when Quantum of Solace, the second Daniel Craig James Bond movie, was being made, the writer had handed in the first draft, and the strike happened, and he said, "Yeah, it needs like another three or four," and they went into production anyway. And the results of Quantum of Solace says you should have waited and done more drafts. That's my hope for Superman Legacy is that even if it postpones it a little bit, if they have to, hopefully the strike won't last that long. That script has to be rewritten, but at least they can get moving in pre-production in the
Yeah,
sense of testing and that sort of thing.
yeah,
So
for sure. Now, on the other movie side of news, we just found out this week that Justice League Warworld is going to get an R rating. So this is the next DC Universe animated film. It's going to get an R rating for some bloody violence. Thoughts, guys?
I'm getting tired of these animated R-rated movies. I mean, that's fine that we have R-rated animated movies, but when it comes to the superheroes, when it comes to Superman and even Batman, it's getting to be a little too much. I mean, each one coming out just seems to be R-rated or more violent, and it's. I mean, I that's fine. There's a place for that. But it would be nice if once in a while they stuck. I'm not saying they have to be the Boy Scout and all of that, but it would be nice if they would just, kind of rein that in a little bit and just tell a good story without having to, put your hand through somebody's chest or something.
my feeling about it is that first of all, DC's done for the most part done a really wonderful job with these animated movies. I think I've been really pleased with most of them. As far as the violence and the R-rated thing is, it depends on what the context is in my mind of what's making it rated R. If it's violence, but it depends on who's committing the violence.
Hmm.
If a villain is committing the violence, which is going to show why that villain must be stopped or something, then I'm not all for it like yay violence, but I'm saying I can understand it more.
Sure.
If it's Superman going dark and putting his hand through the Joker's chest, no, I don't want to see that. I am so sick of Dark Superman that I honestly, the joke I make about Snyder Cut is that he gets reborn. He's Superman again, right? He opens his shirt at the end, and he's Superman. And the next shot we see of him flying around with Batman's head in his hand. That's in the epilogue. That's I don't want that. So if this R-rated thing is because of that, I'm not interested. But if it's for other reasons that support the story, I'm relatively okay with it, depending on what it is.
No, fair point. I'm with you there. Superman and Lois, we've mentioned it a couple of times tonight. You're a big fan of Tyler and what he's been doing, and you love the show. This most recent episode, which was titled Forever and Always, in the last couple of weeks, for fans who've been watching our show, Michael Bailey had some predictions about who he thought certain people were, and they came to fruition in this episode. Yeah. We did find out that the woman that's been going through the cancer treatments that Lois has become friends with, Pia, is Bruno Mannheim's wife. And then we did find out that Mateo, who has been the boy that's been wooing, what's her name, Natalie Irons, is indeed their son. So Michael predicted that would all be happening, and I think he's probably sitting there with a big Cheshire cat's grin on his face right now. But thoughts about those revelations?
I'm terrible with a lot of the names. So his son, though, doesn't surprise me. I knew that almost from the first moment I saw him. I said he's going to be Mannheim's son. His wife being the villain, I didn't know. I did not expect. When she opened her mouth and did the Sonic thing she's doing, when she did that, I have to admit I was a little bit surprised, but not completely, because I did suspect that there was more to her than just this cancer storyline that they're doing. So, it works. The show itself works. This is the thing. This show nails Superman beautifully, I think. And it's just a delight to watch. And the fact that they've said, it might have one more season left, it's like that's a travesty. This thing, they get it, and they should have the ability to continue. That's my feeling about it. That's a total tangent, but what the heck?
No, I'm with you. And we're looking at... sorry, Mark. We're just looking at photos here from the upcoming episode, which is titled Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. This one airs tomorrow night there in the US. So looking forward to this one.
Now, I just want to say I was so involved with this past episode that I didn't even realize to the end he was never Superman. He was never Superman in the whole... and he didn't even notice it. Wow. You're so involved with the story and the cast and the surprises, and then it's incredible.
Yep, indeed. All right, well, as we're getting towards wrapping up the show, I'm just checking on the comic book side of things. This is what we have to look forward to this week in the comic books. Here is this week's comic books for Superman fans. We've got Harley Screws Up the DCU number 3. And the reason I include it, obviously, is because somehow in this book she goes back and interferes with the whole Krypton, Superman coming to Earth, Jor-El and Lara. And that was the cover that was representing a version of Action Comics number 1. Superman Lost number 3 is out this week. Mark, you reviewed this one for us. It's available in a couple of different variant covers, including a Christopher Reeve type tribute there. You don't give it a very great review, but nevertheless we can read that tomorrow on our website. And also the hardcover collection of Superman, Son of Kal-El, Volume 3, Battle of Gomorrah is out this week as well. So that's what we have to look forward to on the comic book side of things. But we are at the end of tonight's show, so to wrap up, I want to say thank you, Ed, so much for coming on and chatting with us tonight. I love the book. It is an awesome read. It really is. You can see it's a labour of love, and that you've put so much passion and pride into it. So well done. Congratulations on the publication of the book, folks. Go out there and enjoy it. Pick it up, whether you do it in digital format or in hardcover, in actual physical copy. Get out and get it either way. The links are up on our website if you want to purchase it. But thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And thanks, Ed. And thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for being co-host tonight, filling in for Michael Bailey. Really appreciate you being part of the show again tonight.
Thank you, Steve, for the opportunity.
My pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Superman Homepage Live. We've loved having you with us as our viewers for the past hour. Thank you so much for giving up your time and being with us tonight to watch the show. And thanks for your questions towards Ed and about his book. But we'll be back next week on Monday, May 15th at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time for another edition of Superman Homepage Live. Hope you'll join us then. Until then, make sure you check out supermanhomepage.com for all your daily news updates on everything surrounding the Man of Steel. Thank you to our sponsors and patrons, Douglas Meacham, John Patrick Van Pelt, and Tina Murray. I'm Steve Eunice. On behalf of myself and Mark and Ed, Thank you for watching Superman Homepage Live. Good night, folks.
Good night.